Have you ever felt like your choices weren't really yours? Like something beneath the surface was guiding your hand. Even when you thought you were in control, you smiled when you didn't want to. You agreed when your gut said no. You stayed silent just to keep the peace, and afterwards, you wondered why. That's not a coincidence. That's not weakness. That's manipulation. But not the obvious kind. Not the cartoon villain barking orders or the shady figure pulling strings behind the curtain. No, this kind is softer, slower, more elegant. It wears a familiar face. It speaks your language. It uses your own emotions against you. And by the time you notice, it's already shaped your choices, your relationships, even your identity. You're not paranoid. You're not overthinking. You're waking up. Because there is a war, not on your body, not on your money, but on your mind. And the battlefield is silence. The weapons are charm, guilt, approval, and the illusion of love. Machiavelli understood this before psychology had a name. He knew that true power doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't demand. It designs. And once you see that, really see it, you can't go back. Manipulation begins where awareness ends. You don't need to be held at gunpoint to be controlled. You don't even need to be threatened. All it takes is the illusion of freedom. That's what makes manipulation so effective and so terrifying. It doesn't come crashing through your door like a thief in the night. It tiptoes in through the back, wearing the smile of someone you trust. It doesn't demand your submission. It makes you think submission was your idea. Most people picture manipulation as loud, obvious, filled with red flags and dramatic betrayals. But that's not how it usually works. The most dangerous kind of control is quiet. It's wrapped in kindness. It sounds like, I just want what's best for you. I understand you better than you understand yourself. You're being too sensitive. I'm only trying to help. And because these words sound caring, we lower our guard. We lean in. We hand over the keys to our mind, thinking we're in a safe place. But underneath that soft tone is a surgical tactic, one designed to confuse, disarm, and shape your decisions before you even realize they're being shaped. The manipulator's greatest strength is intelligence or even intent. It's invisibility. If you don't know you're being played, you won't resist. You'll follow, willingly. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge more by their eyes than by their hands." He wasn't just talking about optics. He was talking about perception, about how easily we are fooled by appearances. Not because we're foolish, but because we're human. We trust what feels familiar, what looks good, what seems emotionally safe. Manipulators understand this. That's why they don't force. They curate. They don't grab the wheel. They decorate the road. They don't yell. They frame. Everything becomes performance. The tone of voice, the facial expression, the timing of a compliment or a sigh. It's not just a conversation. It's a theater of motives. And you're the audience and the actor without even realizing it. You might think, I'm being kind. I'm just keeping the peace. I'm trying to be fair. But the question is, at what cost? Because if you consistently agree when your instincts scream no, if you silence your truth to protect someone else's feelings, if you bend, shrink, or disappear just to avoid discomfort, you are not living from power. You're living from programming, one someone else installed. And the more you do it, the harder it is to notice. That's the real trick of emotional manipulation. It doesn't just distort your relationships. It rewires your identity. You start to see your own empathy as a flaw. You start to confuse guilt with responsibility. You start to believe that saying no is a form of cruelty. And the manipulator? They smile because now you're playing your part perfectly. They study you quietly, then move. Manipulators don't pounce. They observe. They sit back with patient eyes and let you reveal yourself. Because the best manipulation doesn't begin with control. It begins with understanding. Not the kind that comes from love or curiosity, but the kind that comes from calculation. Cold, surgical, invisible. They watch how you speak, how your voice dips when you're unsure, how you over-explain when you feel like you're taking up space, how you laugh too hard when you're nervous, or say sorry when you're not at fault. They clock all of it, quietly, not because they care, but because they plan. They learn your needs before you do. They find a hidden switch inside you, the craving for approval, the fear of conflict, the silent plea to be seen, and they remember it. File it away. Wait for the moment when pressing that switch will get them exactly what they want. They don't use commands. They use suggestions. They don't pull you. They lean just enough to make you adjust. And every time you adjust, you reinforce the pattern. You confirm that their strategy works. It starts small, a harmless compliment at the perfect moment, a subtle sigh just when you start standing up for yourself, a carefully delivered phrase, "I thought you were different." That's the bait. It's never direct. That would raise alarms. Instead, it's gentle. It's almost affectionate. It's designed to create internal confusion, to make you question yourself. And when you begin to second guess your instincts, they've already won. Because now you're no longer protecting your boundaries. You're performing for their approval. Machiavelli would call this a form of psychological warfare, but not the kind waged on armies, the kind waged on the soul, on your identity. He never believed in the nobility of human nature. He believed in patterns, and he studied the emotional levers that move people. Fear, desire, validation, status, guilt. The same 5 forces that most of us wrestle with silently every single day. And once someone understands your wiring, they don't force decisions. They design them. You'll think you're making the choice, but you're not. You're reacting to a pressure you didn't notice from a person you thought you trusted. And this is why emotional manipulators don't look dangerous. They look calm, collected, even caring. They never raise their voice. They never get their hands dirty because they don't have to. You'll do it for them. That's the elegance of their game. They win by disappearing from the scene, by making you the author of your own defeat, one yes at a time. The most dangerous manipulators use love. It's easy to spot manipulation from a stranger. The energy feels off. The intentions feel murky. You get a gut sense that you're being played, and you walk away. But what happens when the manipulator is someone you love? That's where it gets dangerous. Because when control is dressed in care, when coercion comes wrapped in affection, you don't feel violated. You feel needed. They say, "I'm only doing this because I love you and because you want to believe it." You do. They say, "Without you, I'm nothing." And suddenly your guilt becomes your leash. You stay, not because you're weak, but because you're loyal. And that's what they count on. You're not manipulated because you're blind. You're manipulated because you care. This isn't the dramatic kind of abuse people talk about in headlines. It's slower. It's gentler. It sounds like concern. It looks like sacrifice. But under the surface, it's still control. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago. Power doesn't always use violence. Sometimes it uses debt, emotional debt, the kind built over years of shared memories, silent expectations, and unspoken guilt. In a family, it sounds like, after all we've done for you, you owe us. In a relationship, it sounds like, no one will ever love you the way I do. At work, it's, you should be grateful to even be here. It's not about love. It's about leverage. The most dangerous manipulators aren't loud. They don't need to scream. They just look hurt when you try to set a boundary. They just grow cold when you don't comply. They cry at just the right moment, not because they're evil, but because it works. And you fold. You step back. You apologize for disappointing them, even when you did nothing wrong. Because in your mind, love is supposed to hurt. You were taught that standing your ground is selfish, that choosing yourself is betrayal, that protecting your peace means you're a bad daughter, a bad partner, a bad person. But that's a lie. Real love does not erase you. Real love doesn't demand your silence as proof of loyalty. Real love expands your identity. It doesn't consume it. Machiavelli didn't speak of love in romantic terms. He spoke of it as a force, one that can be used just as easily for liberation as for control. So if someone uses love to trap you, to silence you, to shape you into a smaller version of yourself, that's not love. That's a script, and it's time to walk off the stage. Why we're all vulnerable. You're not manipulated because you're stupid. You're manipulated because you're human. Every person, no matter how intelligent, how independent, how self-aware, carries within them one undeniable truth, a weakness, a hidden wound, a soft spot shaped not by logic, but by experience. Maybe you were taught that love had to be earned, that saying no meant rejection, that your value depended on being agreeable, useful, selfless, even when hurt. And so, without knowing it, you internalize a belief. If I make people happy, maybe I'll be safe. That belief became your compass. And manipulators? They don't rewrite your map. They just read it faster than you do. They spot the cracks in your armor before you ever see them. The need to be liked, the fear of disappointing others, the guilt that eats at you when you dare to put yourself first. And they don't attack those cracks. They pour themselves into them. Softly, slowly, lovingly. They say just enough to make you question yourself. They imply, they hint, they pause, waiting for you to fill the silence with an apology, an explanation, a compromise. They never have to say, obey. They simply make you want to. Machiavelli understood that men are not ruled by reason, but by fear and desire. Not raw terror or lust, but subtler forces. Fear of rejection, desire for belonging, fear of abandonment, desire for validation. And so we fold, not because we are broken, but because we crave relief. We want the pain to stop, the silence to end, the tension to dissolve. So we bend, we agree, we surrender. But surrender, once repeated, becomes identity. It becomes your default setting. So automatic, you don't even notice it anymore. You say yes before you think. You apologize before you're blamed. You justify things that make your soul ache, all to keep the peace. But Machiavelli warned, those who ignore their weakness invite exploitation, not because people are evil, but because they are opportunistic. They take what's available. And if you consistently offer your self-worth on a silver platter, someone will eat. The battlefield isn't out there. It's not your partner, your parent, your boss. It's within, in the places you never dared to examine, in the story you've been telling yourself since childhood, that your needs are too much, that your truth is too loud, that your boundaries are a burden. But here's the reality. Those are not facts. They're programs. And unless you rewrite them, someone else will keep running them. So no, your vulnerability is not a flaw. It's a doorway, and you can either guard it or let others walk through it with their muddy feet and their polished lies. Reverse the power, silence, strategy, sovereignty. There comes a moment when you stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And start asking, why am I still letting them? That moment is the beginning of power. But let's be clear, real power isn't loud. It's not about yelling, dominating, or proving your strength. That's theater. Real power is quiet, strategic, unshakable. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to be seen because it's felt. Manipulators don't just control words. They control with your reactions. They rely on your need to explain, to defend, to be liked, to be understood. They thrive on your predictability. So what happens when you become unpredictable? You pause when they expect a rush of words. You stay silent when they bait you with guilt. You say no without justifying it. And suddenly, the script they've written for you, it crumbles. That's where the shift begins. Machiavelli didn't believe in reacting. He believed in anticipating. He advised rulers to plan 3 steps ahead, to read the terrain before making a move, And that same philosophy applies to you. Stop living on emotional autopilot. Start living like a strategist. When someone flatters you, pause. When someone guilts you, observe. When someone presses for a decision, delay. Because in that pause, you break their rhythm. And in that silence, you reclaim your control. Silence isn't weakness. It's a mirror. It forces others to sit with their own manipulation without your energy to distort it. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to explain to be respected. When you speak less, people listen more. When you reveal less, people wonder more. And when you no longer chase understanding from those who twist your words, you become untouchable. But don't mistake detachment for coldness. This isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming clear. Clear on who you are. Clear on what you value. Clear on what you will and will not tolerate. That's what sovereign living looks like. Because sovereignty doesn't mean isolation. It means ownership of your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions. And once you own yourself, no one else can. Machiavelli said, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose." But in this context, fear isn't terror, it's respect. And respect begins the moment you stop being available to people who only show up to control you. So stay still, stay sharp, and let your silence speak for you. Because when they no longer know what you'll do next, you hold the power. Emotional autopilot is their playground. Manipulators don't need you to be weak. They just need you to be predictable. Because predictability is the real target. If they know how you'll respond, if they can count on your need to keep the peace, if they know you'll fold the moment things get uncomfortable, then they don't have to fight you. They just have to wait. They don't need to break you. You'll do it yourself, habitually. That's the danger of emotional autopilot. It feels like kindness, empathy, cooperation, but often it's just unexamined conditioning running the show. You say yes, not because it's right, but because saying no feels like betrayal. You explain, not to clarify, but because silence feels like abandonment. You stay not out of love, but because leaving makes you feel like the bad guy. The manipulator doesn't need to shout. They just need to trigger that script. The one you've been rehearsing since childhood. Don't make waves. Be nice. Don't upset them. Say what they want to hear. And every time you run that program, they win, not through dominance, but through design. Machiavelli knew that those who hesitate are ruled by those who don't. Those who wait to be understood are governed by those who demand. And the person who lives to please, they never lead. They follow. This isn't about shame. It's about pattern recognition. Ask yourself, what's your default reaction when someone flatters you? When someone guilt trips you? When someone says, "Wow, I didn't expect that from you." Do you pause and reflect? Or do you immediately try to fix, explain, please? That's your programming. That's your autopilot. And until you break it, they will keep flying your plane straight into walls they built. So what's the antidote? Unpredictability. Do what they don't expect. Say no and leave it at that. Say less and let them wonder. Step back and let them fill in the silence. Because when you disrupt their pattern, you force them to confront their own tactics. And in that space, you take back your power. It won't be easy. You'll feel guilt, doubt, the urge to explain yourself. That's normal. But remember, discomfort is not danger. It's rewiring. Every time you choose clarity over confusion, stillness over overthinking, self-respect over approval, you are breaking out of their playground and building your own fortress. Because you were never meant to be emotionally predictable. You were meant to be conscious, strategic, free. The final war is internal. It's easy to point outward, to say, they manipulated me, they used me, they twisted my words, my loyalty, my love. And sometimes that's true, but the deepest battle isn't with them. It's not with the person who pushed. It's with the part of you that kept letting them. Because the final war, the one no one wants to face, isn't out there. It's inside, not in the self you show to others, but in the version of you that was shaped long before you understood what power meant. The version that learned, somewhere between childhood and now, that love is conditional, that safety depends on staying small, that saying no is dangerous. This is the part of you that's hardest to confront because it doesn't yell. It whispers. Don't upset them. Don't walk away. They'll hate you. You're only valuable when you're useful. These voices don't belong to you. They were planted by culture, by caretakers, by systems that train you to obey rather than exist. Machiavelli didn't warn rulers about armies. He warned them about beliefs, the internal stories people carry that shape their submission. He knew that the most effective control doesn't come from laws or prisons. It comes from belief systems. From a man thinking the cage he's in is where he deserves to be. And that's what many people never question. Not because they're weak, but because the chains are invisible. Emotional manipulation thrives not on force, but on internal permission, on the unspoken agreement you've made to stay quiet, to stay agreeable, to stay small. And until you break that agreement, the pattern continues. The faces may change, but the game remains the same. So ask yourself, whose voice still echoes in your choices? Who taught you that silence equals strength? That peace means surrender? That discomfort is failure? Because until you name the belief, you can't dismantle the behavior. You'll keep offering explanations to people who don't deserve them. You'll keep feeling guilty for simply having boundaries. You'll keep calling obedience love. But here's the truth. You were not born to be shaped by others. You were not made to earn your worth through suffering. You were not put here to perform for approval. You were built to think, to choose, to lead, starting with your own mind. That's the war Machiavelli understood better than most. Not a war for land or power, but a war for clarity, for sovereignty over the self. And once you claim that, they can no longer touch you. Freedom equals strategy plus self-respect. Freedom isn't found in rebellion. It's found in strategy, not in yelling louder, proving more, or chasing validation, but in knowing exactly who you are and no longer apologizing for it. See, most people think freedom means saying whatever you want, doing whatever you please. But that's not freedom. That's reaction. And reaction is just another kind of chain. Real freedom is clarity. It's the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need to be liked because they've chosen to be respected. It's not about becoming hard. It's about becoming rooted. Rooted in your self-respect. Rooted in your principles. Rooted in a deep awareness that says, I do not exist to be reshaped for your comfort. Manipulators don't fear confrontation. They expect it. They're ready for the tears, the explanations, the shouting. They feed on it. Because when you react, you expose your emotional blueprint. You show them exactly which buttons to press next time. But when you respond with stillness, when you say no without emotion, when you protect your boundary without justifying it, you take away their script. And now they're the ones scrambling. Machiavelli would call this a repositioning of power, not domination, not cruelty, but balance restored. Because you finally stopped trading your peace for approval. You stopped mistaking being liked for being loved. You stopped calling your silence strength when it was really just fear in a better outfit. Real self-respect means you can walk away, not with rage, not with drama, but with clarity. You say, this is where I end, and you begin. You don't get to rewrite my thoughts, bend my choices, or guilt me into submission. And when the accusations come, when they cry, rage, twist the story, you stay still because you understand now. They're not grieving the loss of you. They're grieving the loss of control over you. Let them. Your job isn't to rescue them from that emptiness. Your job is to protect the space you finally clear for yourself. A space no one else gets to enter by manipulation, performance, or guilt. Machiavelli never said to stop feeling. He said to stop being predictable, to guard your emotions with precision, to lead yourself first, and let others respond as they will. That's not coldness. That's consciousness. And once you pair that awareness with self-respect, no one can bend you again. Not because they stopped trying, but because you stopped allowing it. The wisdom of Machiavellian awareness. The world will not stop trying to shape you. It will come dressed in new faces, new voices, new tactics. But the pattern will always be the same. They'll call it love. They'll call it opportunity. They'll call it loyalty. But if it requires you to shrink, to silence yourself, to explain your worth, it's manipulation wearing a mask. And here's the truth. It never really ends. Not completely. The test will circle back. Not because you're failing, but because the world rewards those who know who they are and devours those who don't. Machiavelli never promised peace. He never claimed the world was fair, but he offered something far more powerful. Awareness. Awareness that control doesn't always come from brute force. Sometimes it comes from suggestion, from silence, from approval wrapped in a leash. He taught that sovereignty begins in the mind, that those who cannot think clearly will always be ruled, not by tyrants, but by emotion, by guilt, by need, by the craving to be understood. But now you see the pattern. You've watched it move, from charm to guilt, from flattery to control. You've traced it not just in others, but in yourself. And that's where the real shift begins. Because the final manipulator isn't always a person. Sometimes it's a belief, a memory, a voice you internalized long ago, whispering, don't make them uncomfortable. Don't ask for too much. Don't speak unless you're sure it's safe. And you listen, not because you were weak, but because you were young. Because survival felt safer than authenticity. But you're not that person anymore. You don't need to fight to be seen. You don't need to explain why your boundary matters. You don't need to win every argument, prove every point, or earn every breath. Sometimes power looks like saying nothing. Sometimes control looks like walking away. Sometimes freedom is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to betray yourself one more time. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone access to your peace. And the second you stop asking for permission, you reclaim what was always yours, your mind. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call you cold, distant, selfish. Let them walk away when you stop performing. Because anything that leaves you when you stop people-pleasing was never love. It was a contract of control, written in guilt and signed in fear. And now, you're done signing. Machiavelli didn't ask you to become cruel. He asked you to become sovereign, to stop being readable, to stop being bendable, to stop giving your script to people who only rewrite you for their benefit. In a world of noise, clarity is your rebellion. In a world of manipulation, self-respect is your armor. And in a world that profits from your confusion, strategy is your freedom. So speak less, observe more, think clearly, move consciously, and remember, the most powerful person in any room is the one who cannot be controlled.